and then you'll just have to do the present to everyone. I just want to see like if Sam can get in now.
He's back.
Tom's back?
Yeah.
So even if you wanted to or like mute your mic till you were ready.
I'll do it. Oh, okay.
Hey everybody that's on the line already. We're just going to give everybody a couple more minutes for people to start or to keep logging in, sorry, and then we'll get started.
Oh, there's a delay. There's a delay, right?
Okay, so good afternoon, Rockstar Inner Circle members, and welcome to our first ever live webinar, Crunching the Numbers on Apartment Buildings in Ontario. We've got Paul DeBruzzo on the line, and he's going to take us through crunching the numbers step by step on an advertised apartment building. If you have any questions as we go along, feel free to enter them into the chat area, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. And without further ado, here's Paul.
Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us on your lunch. I know Tom's out there. Hopefully, if his mic works, he can jump in. So we're going to take a look at a property here and crunch the numbers. Before we get into the numbers, I'll quickly show you the listing, what a listing looks like, and what I would look for in a listing. We'll take a look at what the seller or vendor or listing agent would provide us in terms of numbers and what the rent rolls are. And we'll jump into the actual numbers and how to crunch them. But before we do any of that, I just want to say I took a bit of a special interest in kind of crunching numbers or evaluating properties from reading books when I was a lot younger. I used to read a lot of Robert Kiyosaki books, and he used to always use a stock investor. Part of his investment was in stocks, and he always used to talk about analyzing profit and loss statements for businesses. Now, I'm not a stock investor, and neither are you guys. So I decided to get really good at, or at least try to get really good at analyzing the real estate business and real estate investment properties. So we're going to look at a financial statement and evaluate the profit and loss on a real estate investment property. So this is a listing here. Let me just open this up. That's better. So this is a 6-unit building in Kitchener, originally listed at $795,000. There's not really much I look for on a listing other than basically the price, a couple pictures, if anything, and the total number of units. So really quickly, go price, picture, and to total number of units here, 6, and then I typically look for a unit breakdown. So by unit breakdown, I mean how many 1-bedrooms, how many 2-bedrooms, how many 3-bedrooms. So in this particular building, we got 4 2-bedrooms and 2 1-bedrooms. Okay. They happen to mention here that tenants pay heat, water, hydro, and cable TV. Okay. Other than that, there's just some legal stuff here that's not really important to us. Taxes, we'll input that into the spreadsheet later. This is all realtor stuff, and here's how to contact the real estate agent. Not much, okay? Not much at all. So we can kind of minimize that and move on. So typically what my process is when I find a listing and I think it's something of interest or it might fit one of my investors' profiles for what they're looking for, I'll typically put in a phone call to the listing agent or the listing brokerage and request their financials, okay? Or hopefully the listing agent has been diligent enough, to upload all the financials to our MLS system so I can just download them. In this case, I had to make a phone call, and the listing agent sent me this. Okay, so this is just a very basic rent roll. So we got 1-bedroom at $950, 2-bedroom at $995, and so on and so on. Okay, now the first question you might ask here is why is 1-bedroom $950 and another 2-bedroom down here $745? In this specific case, it was just because the size of the units. This 1-bedroom up here was a very, very large 1-bedroom, and these 2-bedrooms are smaller ones. So just because of the size of the unit, they are priced differently, but nothing out of the ordinary here. Now he did provide the expenses for the property in a separate document, but to be honest with you, it was just literally chicken scratch on a piece of paper. So rather than kind of show you that, just gonna jump right into the spreadsheet, and we'll take a look at the expenses there. So I hope everyone can see that well. So again, this property is in Kitchener. They ended up reducing the price down to $775. So I have the list price there at $775. Before we jump into details, I just want to let you know about this spreadsheet is basically broken down into 3 sections. So this first section here is basically all about calculating the gross income. Okay. The second section here is basically there to analyze and calculate your gross expenses. And these bottom 2 sections, one to calculate your financing, and the very bottom is to calculate your profit. So 4 very basic sections. It's not that complicated. It just kind of looks that way from all these numbers everywhere. So gross rental income on this property, $63,960. So what that means is all 6 units added up times 12. Okay, and it'll give you an annual amount. In the basement, there are 2 laundry machines, washer and dryer, and the tenants would use those to obviously do their laundry. They take about $2 a pop each for each laundry or dryer service, and the totals for the previous year were $1,152. Okay, so nice little pocket change. Total number is 6 units, and we have a vacancy rate here. So just a note about vacancy rates is that vacancy rates change from year to year, and we input 2.5 here because it's an average for the area. It's not technically the vacancy rate that the seller had last year. Okay, so you could have 0 vacancy for 3 years going back. We're still going to input a vacancy rate into the calculation because it's an average you have to take over a long period of time. You may go 1 or 2 or 3 years with 0 vacancy and then have half your tenants leave in year 4, and it might take you a month or 2 or 3 to fill each one, and that year your vacancy rate might be 8%, and that would give you an average of 2 to 3 over the last 3 years. Okay, so no matter what, we input this. The second note to keep in mind is if you're doing any financing with CMHC, they will insert their own vacancy rate whether you like it or not. Okay, and CMHC is actually a great resource for financing, and they're a great resource for data. So they collect and keep and publish vacancy rates per area, per city, and per region on their website. So if you want to do some research, CMHC is a good place to start. Okay, so we take the gross rent number, we add the laundry. Okay, that gives us a total of $65,112. We subtract our vacancy rate, so we're taking off about $1,600 here, and we end up with an effective gross income of $63,513. Okay. Moving on to our expenses. So taxes are a constant. Whatever they're listed at, we take that at face value. Insurance, the seller will usually provide. This insurance, this seems like high insurance for a 6-unit building, but this particular building is older. It's in an older area of downtown Kitchener, and it's oddly shapen. So to rebuild this building, if there were a fire or significant damage, it would cost a little bit more. That's why the insurance value is a little bit higher. But typically for a 6-unit building, you're in that $2,000 to $3,000 range, depending again on the size of the building and the structure. Okay. So utilities here, heat, hydro, and water. It was mentioned in the listing that the tenants pay all the utilities. So this particular building has separate meters for each unit and separate meters for gas and for water. This heat cost here that the landlord has to pay is the cost to heat the common area, so the hallways. Okay, there's a separate meter that measures the heat it takes to keep the hallways, at a decent temperature. Okay, so $850 for the year is all you're paying for utilities on this specific building. A lot of buildings are metered for hydro, and landlords charge rent plus hydro. So a lot of times you'll see a 0 here in the hydro column. It's rare to find buildings that are metered for water, but this one specifically is. Okay, and just a note on that: if you are doing renovations to a building and updating it to modern standards, usually you are going to try and pass on as many utilities as you can to the tenants, if it's feasible to do that in the construction or in the renovation of the building. Okay, so maintenance. Maintenance is sort of a cover-all term. It can mean a lot of things. You could actually group your landscaping and cleaning and laundry and some of these other things inside your maintenance cost, but I decided to separate it here just for clarity. So maintenance, what I'm separating here is repair costs. So, plumbing leaks, and if you had to fix the dryer for whatever reason, change a lock, those are all small items that fit under maintenance. And also, if a tenant leaves and you have to do some painting and maybe repair some laminate flooring or repair a kitchen cupboard, that kind of stuff. So turnover maintenance, that's all included in this number. So typically, as a rule of thumb, we use an average of about 3 to 5% of your gross income. So you can see here, this calculates how much of the gross income this expense is taking. So it's about 3.9% of this gross income number. Okay, so about $2,500 a year. I'm going to skip management for a second and come back to it. Landscaping. So there's a little bit of grass at this building, not much, and it wouldn't be costly to really take care of that. What you really have to take care of is making sure the parking lot is clear of snow. You don't want snow building up and tenants driving over snow and creating ice, and then the tenants slipping and falling and creating a liability for you. So you got to be really diligent about making sure there's snow removal or a snow removal service coming in and cleaning out the snow. I'm just averaging it out here. This particular cost wasn't even included from the seller, but as an experienced investor myself and experienced realtor, I know to include this stuff when we're talking with investors. Okay, so cleaning and laundry. You're not necessarily going to pay for a maid or anything to clean anyone's unit, but you may want to, especially in the winter, have somebody come in and clean up the common areas so they don't get full of mud and snow and doesn't get disgusting, really, because it can. So maybe 2-3 times over the winter you might want to have someone come in and mop up the hallways, and maybe once, twice in the summer. Okay, and this reserve, I used to actually include this in the maintenance, so this maintenance would have been a little bit higher at $4,000, but I decided to kind of pull it aside just to kind of make emphasis to it, because it's important that as investors we take this expense into consideration. So what I mean by reserve is your property is going to cash flow, and we need to take some of that cash flow and literally put it aside in a separate account for capital expenditure items that you're going to have to fix at this property. And what I mean by capital expenses, things like roof, windows, furnaces, boilers, hot water tanks, major items that eventually need to be changed. We want to make sure that there's money there in order to fix them. Okay, so on a larger building like this, if you're having to do a roof, it's not really a $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 job. It's probably a $5,000 or $10,000 or maybe more $1,000 job. And so you don't want to get hit with that as a surprise. If you're putting away $1,500 a year, and every 5 or 10 years or so, blowing up the account and replacing the furnace or replacing a roof or replacing some windows, it keeps your building well maintained, and it keeps it stops you from getting surprises or maintenance surprises, and that's something you don't want. Okay, so important. And I've just set this number at my comfort level. As an investor and someone, if you're going to own this building, you're going to want to set that number at your comfort level. Okay, so you could lower it a little bit to 1,000 or maybe up it to 2,000. Okay, and it's important to take this number and really make sure you understand the property you're buying first. So this particular property, a lot of updates have been done. So I'm comfortable myself having a little bit of a lower number here. I might even drop it to 1,000. Okay, because I know the roof has been done. I know the furnaces and the boiler system is new. I know a lot of the windows have been changed. So in the next 5 to 10 years, there's really not going to be a lot of capital expenses coming. But I'm still going to put away $1,000 a year, so just in case something happens. And if in 10 years I have to change a roof, then there's 10 grand there waiting for me. Okay. So let's go back up to management. So management, I rarely include that in my spreadsheets when I'm presenting it to investors, because each and every investor is going to have their own management system. It's very, very flexible. There isn't one way you should do it. Okay, being a 6-unit building, it's on the cusp of where you can manage this thing on your own. Okay, it's small enough and easy enough that if you had the time and you lived close by and it wasn't a 3-hour drive to the building, you could easily manage this thing if you really wanted to. So in that case, I'd put 0, and your cash flow down here would, increase substantially. But knowing my own personal situation, being as busy as I am, taking care of my own job and my house and my own family, I'm probably not going to manage this building even being a 45-minute to an hour drive away. So I'm going to insert some kind of management cost. So typically, if you were to hire, your ABC management company who's going to come in and do all the management for you, A to Z, it's typically going to be somewhere between 5 and 6% of the gross rental income. Okay, so just for argument's sake here, I put it in at 5.5%. Okay, the only extra cost is going to be filling vacancies. Okay, so typically, vacancy would cost you about half a month's rent to fill. So if you had one of those 2 bedrooms at that rent for $950, go vacant, they charge you what, $475 to fill the room for you. Okay, but we don't have to use, if we're going to use a management company, if we want, property management at the company, we don't necessarily have to use a professional property management company. We can use a superintendent. Okay, now a superintendent, the cost for a superintendent might be exactly the same. However, it might provide you some different advantages and in some ways some disadvantages. What's nice about a superintendent is they're living at the property all the time. Or there might be a neighbor who lives next door who's experienced in managing properties, whatever it is. Typically the scenario is they're living in one of the units and you're paying them a small salary to do some on-site management and property management tasks. Okay, so if there is a repair, there's somebody there to take care of it right away. So in most cases, your superintendent or your ideal superintendent is going to be someone who's handy, who can handle small plumbing jobs, handle even small electrical jobs. Who, you buy him a lawnmower and he cuts the grass. You buy him a shovel and he or she will, shovel the walkway. He might manage the snow removal service, who comes in and does the larger parking lot in the back. They might mop and sweep up the common area hallways for you. They'll take care of cleaning out the coins and stuff from the laundry. And if you're diligent enough and you got your systems really down, you can even have your superintendent help you fill vacancies. Okay, if you train them to meet tenants and talk to tenants and have them fill out applications, you could do all the advertising simply on Kijiji. Take all the appointments by phone, refer them to the property for Saturday at 2 p.m. and your superintendent there can be waiting there with keys to open the door, show them around the building, show them around the unit, have them collect an application, fill out an application, collect it, and distribute the application to you. So I know people who do that, and I've kind of done that myself at some of my other properties. Okay. The only other thing that you're missing with a superintendent is rent collection. So a property management company will collect all rent for you. Okay, the rent checks or any kind of electronic payment will go directly to the property management company. So the tenants will make out checks or make electronic payments to ABC Property Management. They will collect the money, clear the money, take their fee out of that monthly rent they collect, and then distribute the rest to you. So typically you'd get your money somewhere halfway through the month. With a superintendent, you'd have to create some system in order to collect rent. So it might be electronic payments, might be everyone slips a check under the superintendent's door and the superintendent goes to the local bank to deposit the checks for you, something of that nature. But so a superintendent can be handy, but there is still some management you'll have to do. Okay, some management of the manager on your end as the investor. Okay, so total expenses here on this property. Let's make that 0 and we'll move the management up here. $18,045. So this number here also important. So 28%. So the expense ratio on this property is 28% of the effective gross income. Okay. So if we take this effective gross income, we subtract our total expenses, you end up with $45,468. So that is your total net operating income. Okay, very important number. What you really have to know and what you should keep in the back of your mind as you're evaluating a property is down the road, if you're a long-term investor, and I hope you are if you are investing in real estate, that once the mortgage is paid off, this net operating income, that's your money. That's your pension income, retirement income, your going on vacation forever kind of income. Okay, because when there's no mortgage to finance, That's what's left for you to enjoy cash flow for. Okay, so this property was actually a property we did with an investor a little while ago. We ended up purchasing this property for $730,000. Okay, so price per unit, if you take this number, you divide by 6 units, you end up with about $121,677 per unit. That's about an average right now. We're seeing prices at the moment anywhere between $100,000 and $130,000 per unit in areas like Kitchener and Hamilton, Toronto excluded, Guelph also. London would be a little bit less, and St. Catharines also a little bit less. Okay. So financing. I want to spend a few minutes here to help you guys understand how the CMHC financing works. So this property was sent to our contact at a commercial brokerage, because this is a commercial property. Therefore, they got commercial financing, and this investor received a first mortgage of $562,100. Okay, CMHC fee of 4.5%. So the total mortgage ended up being $594,000 and change. Okay, at the time he got an interest rate of about 3.25%. You can see monthly payments here, $2,446 plus $142 to service this CMHC number. Total mortgage payments about $2,600. Okay, so I just want to spend a little time and help you understand how we arrived at this number, because it's important. Okay, let's just move up here. So what happens? Keep your eyes locked here, and we'll cover these numbers in a second. What happens when we evaluate a property is we send it off to the commercial broker. His name is Daniel, and Daniel will run his own evaluation on the property based on CMHC's guidelines. Okay, so what that means is CMHC is doing the same thing we're doing, except they have different guidelines. Okay, remember, they're insuring the mortgage on this property, so they're naturally going to be biased and want the property to be more profitable, because it protects their investment also. Okay, so they use an appraisal process called the income approach. In the actual marketplace, properties are valued based on their market value. So the appraisal we do on the market is called a market approach, or market value approach. CMHC does the income value approach, which typically ends up with a lower appraisal amount, or a lower purchase price amount. Okay, so I know that's a lot to take in. If you need further explanation on this, I'm happy to go over it with you during a call, or if you want to attend one of my classes at Rockstar, we get into this in depth. But for the sake of this presentation, let's take that at face value. So CMHC's valuation on this particular building was $661,400. Okay, the minimum down payment CMHC allows is 15%. So CMHC will provide you, or the lender will insure, CMHC will insure the lender, and the lender will provide you a mortgage of 85% of the purchase price. So if we take this CMHC value and multiply it by 85%, we end up with $562,100 first mortgage, as we see here. So the down payment from the investor ends up being whatever purchase price you agreed to, $730,000, minus the first mortgage CMHC has quoted you, and you end up with $167,900 down payment, plus any closing costs. Okay, at this particular property, closing costs, we calculate at about 2%. So 167 plus 14.6, we end up at 182,500. Okay, now the first question in your mind is probably, why is CMHC's value lower than the actual purchase price? Well, again, CMHC is biased. They are insuring the mortgage. They use a different valuation process to assess the value of a property. It doesn't mean you are overpaying for the property. You've paid market value. They are assessing the property at its income value. Okay, very important distinction. So once you've arrived at the first mortgage amount, CMHC applies their fee at 4.5%, and that number gets tacked onto the mortgage. Okay, and we've just gone over these numbers. Your total mortgage expenditure or total mortgage payments for the entire year, $31,071 or $2,600 or so a month. Okay, so just to be clear, this CMHC fee is not paid in cash. It is tacked onto your amount of your first mortgage. Okay, so once we understand the debt service, we can take the net operating income, $45,468, right, and subtract the debt service, and we end up with, you know, $14,397 a year in earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, basically cash flow. Okay, you got about $14,000 a year there in cash flow, or about $1,200 a month. Okay, hang on a second, let me just delete that. This deposit structure, typically with an offer like this, we're putting down anywhere from $20,000 to $25,000 as a deposit. I just want to make that clear. So coming down here to see how much money we're actually making, we have a cash-on-cash return of about 7.9 or 8%. That's calculated by taking this number, this 14,397, and dividing it by your total down payment. So if you were to take a calculator right now and punch in 14,397 divided by 182,500, you would end up with 8% on your cash. Okay. So average profit per unit. So in this property, you're cash flowing about $200 per unit, and that's kind of what we look for. Depending on what area you're in and what the business model for the particular building is, we look to be in the cash flow range of about $100 to $200 per unit. Okay. So your capitalization rate, or cap rate for short, you will hear this term thrown around a lot. Really, the way to calculate this ratio is by taking your net operating income and simply dividing it by your purchase price. So if you were to take a calculator and punch in $45,468 and divide that by $730,000, you would end up with 0.0062. Multiply by 100 and you end up with 6.2%. Okay? This is not a be-all, end-all indicator. What this tells us is the ratio between the net operating income and the actual purchase price. Okay? The higher the cap rate, the more profitable the building. Essentially, what you really want to do is buy at a high cap rate and then sell it at a low cap rate, because the lower the cap rate, the higher the purchase price. As a little bit experiment, let's just try that right now. Let's say this building was $100,000 more. Let's say we bought it for $830,000. I'll show you what happens to the cap rate. Okay, so we changed the price to $830,000, exactly the same net operating income, and the cap rate has dropped to 5.5. Still profitable at, you know, $850 a month or so, but the cap rate has dropped to 5.5. So when you hear things in the news or in the real estate investment circles like cap rates are shrinking or cap rates have shrunk to 4 and 5% in Toronto, that's exactly what they're talking about. The properties are not making that much more money. It's the purchase prices and market values that have risen dramatically. Okay? Let's change that back. So this, let's see here, this gross rent multiplier number, what that is the effective gross income as a ratio to your purchase price. Again, it's just an indicator. It's not a be-all, end-all kind of thing. It just helps us kind of evaluate properties at face value. I think that's it for the spreadsheet. Okay. What I want to just make clear is that these spreadsheets are you can't judge a property just by its spreadsheet or just by its cover. Okay. we have to evaluate each property on its own, and every single property will present different opportunities and different advantages and disadvantages. There's so few of these properties, and each property is so unique that just taking one of these spreadsheets and scrolling down to the bottom, as a lot of investors do, and say, oh my God, it cash flows $1,200. This property is great, or this property is bad. It's not the right way to do things. So we need to kind of visit properties. We need to evaluate properties as a whole rather than just look at cash flow and say this is good or this is bad. So I'm just going to cover a couple questions and we'll wrap this up. Let me see here. I'm just scrolling through some questions. Bear with me one moment, please. So I got a question here about what cap rate range we should aim to buy for. That's a great question. It really depends on the area we're in. So for example, in Kitchener and in Hamilton, there's similar markets in terms of prices of market value. We're going to aim to be in the range of about 5 to 6% or higher. I mean, if we can get it at 6.5 or 7, then great, why not? But at this particular moment in the market, we're aiming to be in the range of 5 to 6%. If we were shopping in Toronto, those numbers are pretty much out the door. If you can find anything that cash flows, then, and if you're really stuck on buying in Toronto, then you should buy it, because there's not a lot of properties that actually cash flow there. Cap rates are in the range of 3 to 4. Okay, if we're in some tertiary markets like London, for example, we're going to try and be at least 6 and above if we're looking at apartment buildings. I think that's it. I want to just reintroduce Andrea, and we'll kind of wrap this up. Thanks, guys, for taking your lunch, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, everybody, we're going to wrap up. For those of you that did have trouble with it freezing, there will be a link that we will send out for the video. The recording never stopped, so you can catch anything that you might have missed. And just before we go, Paul, what's the best way for people to reach you if they have any questions about any of this?
The best way to reach me is by email, so very simply paul@rockstarbrokerage.com. If you have any other questions specifically about properties, you can reach out to your coach also. If you'd like a copy of this spreadsheet, you can also email me and I can help you go through it that way.
All right, that's it for today. Thank you for joining us on our first ever live webinar. And until next time, your life, your terms.